To Class Matua Karaina, would you mind opening our Hoi with the Karakia, please, Matua? Tēnā koe.
Kia ora tātou, Pakahonioi. E tuana haere, nā ki tanga o te matua, tama wairi o tapu, ane e pono o te māngai, anō i tautoko, aini ākini ai. Matua tama wairi o tapu, ane e pono, whakapainga e nei hui, o mai te pika ora me te maramatanga, e te manga anō i tautoko, aini ākini ai. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe. Nau mai hoki mai. Do we have any apologies for this hui today? Do I look to
Mike Mohi.
Mike Mohi?
Yep.
Because he's 80.
Nikki Kirikiri, yes, she's overseas. Is that what you've got? Yes, and can I have a mover for the apologies to be accepted? Thank you, Michelle McElroy. Seconder, thank you, Henry Wai. Akai tātou. All right. Tamahi. Okay, any housekeeping for today? Nothing that I'm aware of. Only good news that we will be finishing early. If we all stay online and stay focused. So, any conflicts of interest anyone needs to declare? Or online, Carl? Can I just check who monitors online?
Usually Alison, you do.
You're monitoring online, so you'll let me know if someone's got their hand up. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So no conflicts of interest. Follow-ups from previous regional planning committee meetings on page 3 of our paper. Who's speaking to this? Anybody? No?
You taken as read.
Yeah.
I'm just opening. I will do. Do you want me to introduce myself?
Oh, you haven't met the committee? Oh, well, let's let our new CEO introduce us. Thank you.
Okay. E te komiti o te konehera a rohi o te matua Māui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ko Nick Pete tōku ingoa. No te motu o Guernsey ahau. Engari mahi ahau ki roto o Whanganui me te Papa Oia. Ko te tumu whakarai hau o te konehera I Nainei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, tēnā.
And then I'll do the follow-ups, eh? So I think we had 4 follow-ups from the previous meeting. Cyclone Gabrielle response, recovery and reviews. And I understand there was some email went out to the RPC on the 15th of June. And there was a letter to go from our co-chairs to NEMA, so the National Emergency Management Agency, regarding the forecasting provided by the Met Service. I would need to check if that one has been done or not, I think. Kotahi plan, number 3, formal letter requesting an extension of the 2024 deadline. I can update you on that. So there's an order in council, it's an instrument used by government to give an extension. It isn't finalised yet, but it's just going through its process, which would extend the deadline for the NPSFM, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, for 3 years. So we'll wait on the final decision on that. So will give us a little bit longer to do the mahi collectively on that. Minor items, debris to be cleared from the river and at Tangoio. Mid-June clearance is underway. What was the last update we had?
My understanding it's been completed.
Aye. So kia ora, that's the follow-ups.
Thank you, Nick. Do we move EBR? Do we move EBR? No. Oh, no, perfect. Okay, let's move to the next item, number 4. Calling for any minor items that are not on the agenda. Does anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the Mohaka plan change.
Kia ora, we'll add that. Thank you, Teresa?
Yes, I've got one too on the FMUs, just an update, where we're at with all that.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Tanya Eden would like to know about the FMUs. Any other minor items?
Debris clearance at Whakamahi and the Mātangiro reserves.
Thank you, Michelle McRoy. Debris clearance where?
Mātangiro reserves in Wairoa and Whakamahi.
Okay.
At the mouth.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll come to those at the end of our hui today. Kapai,
Sorry,
Oh, yes, Tanya.
just another one from me, because I realise that not all of us sit on the recovery unit, but it would be actually good to have a standing update in respect of what's happening for those that don't sit on that previous hui that took place around fossil and other areas and what's happening in the categorisation whenua Māori perhaps areas.
Do a verbal today if that's useful as well.
Yep.
Kapai.
Along with.
Yep, Kapai, shall we do that at the end then? Yep. We'll add that as a matter at the
Thank
end.
you.
And just noting the request for a standing item
Please.
or an update on that. Okay, thank you. Any other items, minor items? Oh, okay. Alrighty, so the other item that we had is item 5, was the tangata whenua appointees remuneration, and just for everybody's information, that item's been withdrawn. Those of you who were at the last council meeting will be aware that there was a request for the paper to be addressed with the Māori committee and also the tangata whenua reps. So I know it's been done with the tangata whenua reps, and I know that a revised draft was received yesterday. I've received a draft, and I just need to check whether the Māori committees had their input as well. But that report will go to, they have?
They have.
Okay, and then that report, once it's been finally reviewed, will go to council at their next meeting. So hence why it's being withdrawn today. And I just wanted to make the comment that the regional planning committee remuneration of tangata whenua is a matter that's provided for in the terms of reference for the RPC, and that it's a matter for, I suppose, the process is set out in the terms of reference, which should arrive at a result for the tangata whenua remuneration that then goes to council for confirmation. That's the process. It's not something that comes to the RPC for discussion, what the tangata whenua members are paid. So just to be clear on that process.
Chair, just on that one, quite correct, the Māori committee did consider what came through from strategic pay. They've adopted what was in that paper, and it is heading towards council. But just to acknowledge your engagement both with Kathy Hendry at strategic pay and also through our governance team in terms of the paper, the withdrawal from this one here, and the new paper that'll go through once it's been checked over. Thank you.
Hi, Ngamahi, thank you.
Madam Chair, can
yes.
I ask that we move the minutes from our last meeting, 17th
yes.
of May?
Beg your pardon. Obviously taken as read, are you happy to move them?
I'm happy to
I'll
move.
second. And so moved by councillor Ormsby, seconded by Tanya Eden.
All those agree? Aye.
Whakai tātou? Ka pai. Thank you.
I can't even remember if I was here.
Okay.
Oh,
So
yeah, everything.
the next item we have is Clifton to Tang Oil Coastal Hazard Strategy and Mātauranga Māori Workstream. And I see we have Simon Bendel online. Simon, am I to invite you to speak to this paper?
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, ko Simon Bendel tōku ingoa. Is my sound coming through okay?
Great.
Cool, thank you. So thanks for having me in today. I'm dialing in from Taupo. Sorry I can't be there in person to speak to this. But look, the intent of the paper is really to update this committee on the work of the strategy, the particular focus on the Mātauranga Māori work stream. As I think many of you will know, this work stream's been underway for a long time, or the strategy itself has, since about late 2014. And I see Councillor Van Bake's online too, as the chair of that committee. So please jump in, Councillor, with any additions you'd like to make. This similar paper has also gone to the Māori committee last week, so we're trying to keep all updated on our progress as we go. As summarised by the paper, the intent of the strategy itself is to put in place a long-term plan to respond to the effects of coastal hazards, particularly inundation and erosion, initially between Clifton and Tangoio, but the idea is to develop a model to roll out kind of region-wide in time once we get the model kind of right for rolling out. Through the Joint Committee, we are preparing the strategy itself for public notification, now targeted for sort of mid to late next year, sort of August 2024. And that will put forward, I guess, the Council's proposal for what to do about these coastal hazards in the short, medium and long term. This work is largely informed by the work of some assessment panels that were formed a few years ago, 2017, 2018. And at that time, we had really strong engagement from tangata whenua. They were part of the panels and really informing our work. But that engagement has really dropped off since then. So there has been a key gap for us to try and find a better way to engage in a more effective way. And that is where this Mātauranga Māori workstream has really been born, about how do we do a better job of engaging with tangata whenua as we move the strategy towards a publicly notified document. So the scope for that Mātauranga Māori workstream is in your agenda packs. I'm happy to go through in detail if you wish, or just take any questions about it. Has been developed through and with the Joint Committee and with support from HPRC's Māori Partnerships team. Work has started, so we're being supported in this work stream by Aramanu Rōpia, who many of you will know. She was the kaitiaki o Te Rōpū for the project some years ago. Also was the author of a CVA for the strategy, so she's well versed in this work and ideally placed to support us. So really the next 12 months from here to August next year will be a pretty intense period for us to get everything lined up and ready to go out there. And a key focus for us is to make sure that what is notified next year is really not a surprise for tangata whenua or anybody else. So look, that is a brief summary of the paper, Chair. Happy to go to any questions there might be, or if anyone wishes me to go through that Mātauranga Māori workstream scope in more detail, if that would be useful.
Well, we take the paper as read. Does anyone want to go through the Mātauranga Māori scope? It's only a page and a half long, so quite short. I'll take it as read in any event.
I'm happy to take it as read, but it would be good to get an overview because I haven't actually been involved in this and I don't know who else hasn't. Yeah. If it's only a page and a half, that shouldn't take long.
Simon, would you mind just speaking to how that evolved and probably the highlights of what it involves, the scope?
Yeah, happy to. So it is attached to your agenda. I've just managed to lose it off my screen now, but I will just bring it up again. In terms of how it was developed, while I'm digging through my multiple tabs here, so we had a small working group formed under the Joint Committee. So initially directed by the Joint Committee to get started, we formed a working group. Tanya Hopkins was part of that. Councillor Hiniwai Ormsby was on that. I think at the time Alana Hiha from Mana Ahuriri was sitting on that little working committee and supported by the Māori Partnerships team. The scope was drafted up. We brought it up to the Māori committee and from memory also this committee. This is in the last triennium to kind of test it before we then sort of confirmed it all. So it's been through a reasonably substantive development process. Let me just bring up the actual scope itself. It's got essentially three main deliverables. The first is to come up with a framework or a Mātauranga Māori framework for the coast. The thinking at this stage, this may be refined through further engagement, is that it's based on PSGE areas, so sort of one for each PSGE area as it relates to the coastal space we're working in. There's some debate about how best to do that, whether you could have one framework for the whole coast or one per hapu, how we might divide it up, but it was felt that the PSGE sort of areas were the best way to deal with that, acknowledging there will likely be some differences up and down the coastline. So that's the first bit. The second bit is to come up with a plan of how to implement or weave that framework through our work, so actually the implementation of it. And the third key part is around supporting some monitoring activities on the coast. So as we look to roll out these activities for responding to coastal hazards, what values are out there, what monitoring should be done to make sure we're aware of those issues, so that we don't end up in a situation where the things we are doing to respond to coastal hazards are not actually making it worse. The solution's sort of worse than the cure. So that's a brief summary. I'm not sure if we covered all the high points, but happy to go any questions.
Ka pai. Thank you, Simon. Questions for Simon? Anybody? No questions for Simon? Simon, so the next time you're proposing to report to us is in about 6 months' time, is that correct?
Yeah, that's great. We're happy to be guided by the committee on what would be useful. We intend to keep you posted on progress. If you'd like less or more, just please let us know.
Ka pai. All right. If there's no questions for Simon, must be due to your superbly clear report, Simon. Thank you. Sorry, we do have one from Laura.
Kia ora, Simon, thank you. I think we've got a rep on there, but I'm just asking, in the next 6 months, what do you hope to do with this framework? Where are you going to be at?
Yeah, kia ora. So we are starting in October is when we're starting out with essentially the first step is a literature review. So working, what's already out there in the public realm that tangata whenua have said about values for the coast. So that will be hopefully all wrapped up by the end of the year as a write-up of all available information that we have. I know that Aramanu is also hoping to engage with sort of more at an individual level over the next few months as well. So I would hope that by the end of this year, we would have that picture of what's already known or what's already been said by tangata whenua, so not doubling up on that, with a view to the early part of next year, translating that into a draft framework for testing. So in 6 months, that would take us through to the next year. We should be pretty well advanced with that framework piece, that first sort of outcome of the work stream.
Just addition to that, is there any sort of themes that you're going to be looking at in the literature review?
So, any themes?
Yeah. What type of things? Because to have a literature review or a framework, you need some themes to hook it on.
Yeah, I think that there's, well, that's in my mind, and Aramanu is working on this right now, so she may have a different view. But in my mind, the key thing is we know there's lots of information already out there about the values that tangata whenua have for the coast. So rather than ask the same question over again, let's collect what's already been said as a starting point and figure out where those values sit, both in terms of are there particular sites that are really important, are there particular taonga species that are particularly important in particular areas, to try and get a bit of a picture of what's out there at the moment. For me, the key thing to make sure we are aware of is, as I mentioned before, is there anything that is being proposed to respond to coastal hazards that's just not going to fly because the effects will be, worse than the problem we're solving. And so one example of that is throughout the process, the tangata whenua reps raised quite a number of times concerns about the large-scale re-nourishment we're proposing, and concerns about, will adding gravel to the beach end up smothering reef systems or affecting, kai moana. So in terms of the themes, I see that as key things like taonga species, specific sites or areas of interest, and broadly what has already been sort of said out there in the public realm about those values as a starting point for further engagement. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of, but ka pai,
Kind of.
it's a start. Yeah.
Ka pai, thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Any further questions? Online or in the room? No? Ka pai. Well, Simon, thank you for your reporting. Look forward to the next one, and we'll let you know if we need an update prior to that. But thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Okay, thanks all. Ka kite.
So we receiving your point. Yeah, yes, thanks. My helper. Can I have someone move that report, please, that we accept that report? Thank you, Laura. Can I have a seconder?
Yep.
Thank you, Teresa. Whakaai tātou?
Aye.
Aye. Ka pai koe. All right. moving rapidly through and on to the Kotahi Plan update, item 8. I wonder too if the question about FMUs in the Mohaka Plan change relate to that you might be able to address that for us.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So how about,
How would you like to do that?
how about I address the FMUs and Mohaka plan change update and then you fill in the rest?
Okay.
Okay. Apologies, everybody. I've actually been away sick for the last week and a bit, and so I don't have everything at my fingertips. I'm relying on the team, most capable. In terms of the FMUs, we made a decision at the last PC meeting that we had that we wouldn't make a decision on FMUs, that we would undertake to go and do vision and values and Te Mana o Te Wai work with the PSGs and or Tai Whenua before we landed on those. And so that's what the team have started to do. And so we are keen to work with whoever's willing and ready to start framing up vision and values and then ultimately Te Mana o Te Wai statements for each of the takiwa. And then...
Sorry, through the chair, just before you continue on, so what work have you undertaken with Tai Whenua and Mana Whenua to date?
For...
You just said that you've undertaken work to talk.
We are about to undertake, so we
haven't
have...
as yet.
We've started engaging with those PSG and Tai Whenua that are keen to get going.
I think they're all keen because this impacts on us quite hugely, so we'd be interested in hearing your process going forward and around the engagement, because to date we haven't been engaged with to undergo this discussion.
Certainly, I'm sure the team would be more than happy to have those conversations with
Please.
Mana Ahuriri.
And Tai Whenua Te Whanganui Aotearoa too, yeah.
So, and where there will be overlaps, obviously, between the PSGs and Tai Whenua, that will need to be sorted out between the Tai Whenua and the PSG.
What do you mean sorted out?
The PSG and Tai Whenua will need to determine who's going to be
We
assigning.
work together, so there's no need for us to sort out. Maybe you should sort your
Chair.
process. Yeah, through the chair, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm just
Kapai.
saying this is really important for us. to have this-
Understood. So let's let Katrina answer the question
Kapai.
one at a time, and then through me, we'll conduct the next set of questions. So Katrina, you were just answering how
Yeah,
you see
so
it working.
ultimately, through our Māori partnerships team, the policy team, they have been drafting up a template that we will be working with PSGs and Tai Whenua on to help them create their vision and values and Te Mana o Te Wai statements. We will roll those out through our relationships, and happy to engage in contracts with either PSG or Tai Whenua to do that work. However, knowing that there are overlaps, it's not for council officers to determine who sets the vision and values. It will be for the PSG and Tai Whenua to determine those vision and values and who works those overlaps out.
Kapai.
In terms of Mohaka, I've just got an update from Kerry, who's also at home sick, so I just need to read that out. I don't have visibility of that work all the time. The team have met just a month ago and provided NPDT with a variation to their contract to enable them to undertake the second phase of that work. The second phase of that work is the Te Mana o Te Wai vision and values and statement, and they are working with their leaders Rupu to do that. We're expecting that by the end of the year. Remembering that stage 1 was the desktop PO and foundation work. Stage 2 is the tangata whenua management options, state of the takiwa, which is desktop assessment and summary of findings, and then attributes, targets and limits. Stage 2 is communicating that back to this committee. That's where we're at.
Kapai.
So I'll
Kapai.
let...
Thank you. Just looking at Teresa, make sure that accords with what you understand. Thank you. Thank you for those on the trot
No
updates.
problem.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you, Nicola.
Kia ora. So winter illness really is affecting us, and I am standing in for Kerry, who wrote this paper today. So I will do my absolute utmost to walk you through it, but I will take it as read. And as you heard earlier, there is an OIC in the works at the moment with a proposed extension to the MPSFM deadlines. That has, I just checked on the Ministry for Environment's website this morning, and they've got an expected date of the 5th of September for that to be announced or enacted. So that's probably the most kind of pertinent things that are happening in that space at the moment. But we have also been involved with the recovery team and the rural recovery team, helping support the development of the environmental resilience plans. We've also been involved in the community meetings and keeping our ears open. So we're capturing those issues that may also help feed into kotahi or spatial planning work as we undergo it in the future. So happy to take questions on the paper.
Thank you. Questions for Nicola on the kotahi plan? Any questions online? No? Too easy. Too easy. Okay, I think we're done on that one. So thank you for joining us, Nicola. Thank you for your reporting. Thank you to Katrina. Can I have someone move that we accept that report on the kotahi plan? Is that you? Thank you, Councillor Ormsby. Kia ora. Thank you, Kerry. Kerry Ropiha. Awesome. Whakai tātou. Ai, ka pai. All righting. So the next item we've got is the update on the government's RMA reforms, which will require a crystal ball as well. So, is that you, Nick?
Through you, Chair, I'm sure Katrina will give me a hand, but I thought as she's been away sick for a week, I'd like to give the committee a bit of an update because it's moving a little at the moment. So just in terms of the legislative place, we currently have the third reading of the two bills, the NBA and the SPA, so the Spatial Planning Bill and the Natural and Built Environment Bill. Were in the House last night. I was at Pakowhai Hui, so I'm not actually sure what happened in Parliament last night, but we'll find out in the next few days. I understand the government is looking to get royal assent for those two bills becoming acts sometime next week before the House rises. I have got a couple of slides which I'll get Alison to put up, if that's all right, that deals with a bit of a summary of the RMA, sorry, the replacement to the RMA. In terms of timing, I think we've got a session for a number of people with the MFE sometime in the next 2 weeks. I'll check who's on the invite list for that. The new acts, or when they become acts, will have some immediate effects, but they're quite limited to some of the way that consents are considered. The longer term issue is probably the one around how the region organises itself, the statutory treaty role of this committee, and so on. And that's not going to be addressed in these two acts in any detail. Also understand that with a change of government on the way, or potentially on the way, I shouldn't say is on the way, maybe on the way, then we're yet to understand what an incoming government might want to do with the RM reform process. So whatever the makeup of that government, whether it's similar to the current one or a new one, they've yet to make those decisions. And I think we could probably spend a lot of time discussing and debating how to proceed with these two bills and acts to be, and then find that that's kind of out of date in 10 weeks' time. So my suggestion would be, as material comes out of MFE over the next couple of weeks, we make sure that's circulated to the committee. If the committee have got any questions around what that material means, we'll try and deal with them. But perhaps we hold off having a really detailed workshop until we understand perhaps where the new government is going. Would be my kind of suggestion as to how to proceed from here. There's a little slide pack here that MFE have put together which I'm happy to take people through if you'd like me to, or just to circulate it at the end of this week.
I think given the uncertainty, which you pointed out, probably best to just circulate it, and we'll focus our brains on it when we have to. Yes? Okay, ka pai. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Nick. Any other questions for Nick? I had one question. I know you can't crystal ball gaze, but what's the best guess in terms of when we might know whether, well, what we're going to be dealing with as the Regional Planning Committee in terms of what the law will be? If it receives royal assent, it will be law. And then what normally happens with incoming governments is they take, 3 to 6 months to work out what they're actually doing?
Yeah. And my understanding, I was in Wellington last Friday, and I asked MFE, will the relationship between these pieces of legislation and existing treaty legislation be sorted out in these two bills? And their view was no, there's going to be more legislation to come
Fabulous.
to try and deal with that, or at least a new process to come to deal with that. So I think it's a matter of wait and see. That doesn't necessarily stop us having any conversations, but I'd suggest it's a kind of October, November discussion for us, because we might want to feed into whatever process MFE has around that. And you've clearly got a direct treaty relationship with the Crown over those issues.
Doesn't mean we have any clearer insights.
No.
No. Question from Laura Keel.
Oh, kia ora, through you, Chair. Kia ora, Nick. I just wondered if there would be a transitionary type there just going.
There is a transitionary arrangement. So at the moment, I understand the RMA will still have effect.
Okay.
And there are a number of provisions in these bills which, once they become acts, will take immediate effect. One of those relates to how the three pieces of legislation are considered in consent processes. There's one around the duration of consents related to water takes, which will be limited, and a couple of others. Again, until we kind of actually see them, it's going to be quite hard to predict, but happy to put those information packs out to you, and if there are any questions that they raise for you in your mind, between Katrina's team and myself and Piri, we'll do our best to answer them in the intervening period. And if it looks as though there's anything that's really urgent and we need a workshop in the intervening period, if I work through the two co-chairs to bring us back together if we need to.
Thanks, Nick. And through the chair, we're all working with MFE as well on our own treaty settlement process and the impact that these changes are having. Not only us, but nationally, iwi chairs throughout the country. I think we've got a Zoom tonight with them as well. So, yeah. But it would be good if you could put out an information pack to us as well.
Yep, we're happy to do that.
So if I could just ask a further question, does this mean then for the work of the RPC, although we're not in a hurry as we were before potentially to do the Kotahi plan, does this mean the primary work of the RPC will still be the Kotahi plan and progressing that?
Yes.
Yes, at this stage.
Right, because that won't change.
That won't change.
Okay, thank you. Ka pai, any last questions for Nick on this item?
Through the chair, I just wanted to
Tanya.
ask around the makeup of the RPCs, because it's going to be different in the country. And obviously, we have quite a special legislative requirement for here. What is the ongoing discussion around that? Yeah.
That I think is the piece where we do want to resolve that here as to how that's going to work. Again, my suggestion would be let's see what comes out in the legislation, where that leaves us. I understand the treaty legislation is not, so that directly as the RPC is not going to be clear at this point. And so we probably need to come back together to figure that through. Given the focus on recovery at the moment, I think we've got time with an election due in however many weeks, just to take a breath. These pieces of legislation will do their thing around consenting, but we've then got some time to think about that. And I'm really conscious that you also have that direct treaty relationship with the Crown. So we kind of bring all of that together, which feels like perhaps a late September or October type workshop.
And just one more
busy
question
man.
from me, sorry, just in relation to OIC through the chair, Orders of Council, particularly interested in not only, I know the TAS one doesn't relate here, but and the waste management one maybe, but also I was on the Zoom this morning with DPMC around Papakainga developments in category, well, in all category areas, but predominantly looking at the fossil stuff. So what work's being done in that area or being done?
The ones we've mostly been engaged with have been around the changes to things like the NPSFM deadline, and we've been involved around our LTP process. But if you're want support and information from staff here around those other OICs, if the committee was to let me know which ones,
Thank you.
I can ask Gavin to help, and I'm sure, whatever support we can provide into those processes for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Okay, can I have a mover for item 9, the update on the government's RMA reforms? Thank you, Laura. Seconder, thank you, Tony Eden. Whakaai tātou? Whakaai tātou? No. Thank you, Hene That's awesome. Okay, so the next item we've got is our policy projects update. Page 33.
Policy projects.
Or is it statutory advocacy?
You doing it?
Where is Kerry?
Policy, plan change preparation. Oh, yes, plan change preparation.
Sorry. I put mine on something else.
Should have just stayed up here.
You should have.
Yeah, you just stay.
So I will once again take it as read and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Nicola? No? No questions? Really honing in on
We've
afternoon
obviously
tea
done a
time.
really-
Yeah,
Really good job.
okay. No other comments you want to make, right, Nicola?
Just that work continues on with the outstanding water bodies. With the outstanding water bodies, plan change evidence has been exchanged last Friday for that, and Tank continues on, but I understand most of you probably received an update with that this morning. Mediation has been set and that process continues, so they're keeping us busy as well.
Kapai. All
Yeah,
right.
question, sorry, through the
Yes,
chair,
Tanya Eden.
on the FDS, if we could get some sort of commentary. I'm on it, so I know what's happening, but I know I'm mindful that the rest of the group aren't, yeah.
So I'm not involved in the FDS work, that largely sits with Gavin Ide, so I wouldn't want to possibly comment, but Katrina might be able to help us.
What's an update?
Sorry, can we just explain FDS?
Future development strategy.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was that?
Future development strategy.
Aye.
Where are we at? So there's a document prepared for public consultation that came to our council, and at the time that it came to our council, it had gone to Hastings District Council the night before, who had suggested changes. Our council has delegated a number of councillors to work with officers on the amended version from Hastings so that we don't go in a committee roundabout. Otherwise, it'll never get out there to the public in time. And so they are aiming to go out for public consultation in the next month or two, is my recollection. I could be wrong on those dates, but they'll be coming out. And basically the Future Development Strategy paper for consultation, for public consultation, sets out some high-level indicative areas that could be identified as future development areas for the region. But only in respect of, and I should be clear, only in respect to those urban areas of Napier and Hastings that are required to do this work under the FDS, under the National Policy Statement. Sorry.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, thank you. Can I have a mover, please, for the policy projects update? Thank you, Michelle McElroy, and the seconder, thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Whakai tātou?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Also for giving me the lollipop to Laura. Okay, so this brings us to the statutory advocacy update. And that's you again, Nicola.
Yeah, it is. I'm going
Thank
to phone a friend on this one. So there's a couple of key pieces of legislation that have come through. We've had 2 national policy statements come through since we last met. The first of which is our national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity, which Saul's going to speak to you about. And I've got the far less exciting national policy statement for greenhouse gas emissions from process heat. So it is as exciting as it sounds, I promise. But I will pass over to Saul to let him run you through the MPSIB.
So as it's my first time here in the hot seat, I think I should probably introduce myself to you all, give a little context. Yeah. So kia ora koutou katoa, ko Saul Goodall tōku ingoa, no whanganui ahau, ko Ruapehu Te Maunga, ko whanganui Te Awa, kei ahuriri ahau anoho ana. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Hi, my name's Saul Goodall, like I said. I'm a member of the policy and planning team. To give a little context, why I'm here speaking of these slides is in a past life, I worked for the Department of Conservation as a biodiversity ranger up on the Maungaharuru range at Boundary Stream. And that sort of started my love for all things Indigenous biodiversity and natural environment. And when I started here about 15 months ago at HBRC in the policy and planning team, I was given the ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity portfolio. So that's why I'm here speaking to these slides. I just have to find it. Bear with me. So, the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, or the NPSIB, as we know it colloquially, another NPS to add to the list of growing NPSs. So I've just pulled this out. There's a lot to it, but I pulled out, for me, sort of the key points that I thought I should talk to today. The first is that it was gazetted on the 7th of July, and that it came into effect on the 4th of August. So it is in effect now. So our consents team and consents teams throughout the region from district councils will be having to have regard to giving effect to this document. I thought it should be noted that the NPSIB actually is limited to or relates to terrestrial ecosystems, not freshwater or coastal marine ecosystems. But it does relate to some aspects of wetlands, which I can talk to later on, but that's more around the restoration or Indigenous vegetation targets. There is one single objective, and that is to maintain Indigenous biodiversity across Aotearoa New Zealand so that there is at least no overall loss in Indigenous biodiversity. Why is this needed? I think you all know that, but I'll touch on it. We have a large amount of endemic species in New Zealand, and we also unfortunately have a large amount of threatened and at-risk species in New Zealand. So this is just another tool sort of in the toolbox to halt the decline of Indigenous biodiversity. Yes.
We have a question.
So is it protecting the already established biodiversity, or are we going to move towards recreating what was there in the future? Would this protect that?
So for me, it's more about protecting what already is there, though I can talk to it later on, there is sort of provisions within this document that talk to increasing Indigenous vegetation, so planting or recreating, yeah. I'll touch on that later on. Yeah. I'll try not to bore you too much by talking too much. But
I had a quick question,
yes.
so if I might, back on the first slide.
Yes.
I saw some legalese going on there about, if you don't mind going back to that first slide.
Thank you.
What is meant by at least no overall loss. So it sounds like some loss is going to be tolerated and there's some weighing machines where some species might drop off, but it's all right if overall there's some. So I'm just trying to understand what that actually means.
Well, I think it's to do with, later on I'll talk to it, the use of the effects management hierarchy. So yes, there will have to be decisions made where avoidance is unavoidable, then you have to go to mitigate, remedy, through to offsetting and compensation. So
Okay,
yes,
sorry,
yeah.
you're going to get to
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So these are just some key points. Like I said, there's a lot of clauses to get through, but I thought for this committee here to talk to some of these. So the NPSIB recognises the role of tangata whenua as kaitiaki of Indigenous biodiversity. It now provides clear and consistent standards for identifying SNAs across the motu. I know that was sort of contentious beforehand. Now there's a specific criteria within Appendix 1 of this document. It provides flexible provisions for SNAs on whenua Māori or specified Māori land. So the management regime for general land, if I could call it that, SNAs, is different to how you manage SNAs on Māori land. They still have to be identified, but how they're managed is developed in conjunction or collaboratively with tangata whenua. So that should enable Papakainga and marae and other buildings to be allowed on that land. So it's not as prescriptive as the other general provisions. The NPSIB sets targets for increasing Indigenous vegetation cover, like I talked to before. They're sort of 10% minimum targets for both urban and non-urban environments, and prioritise restoration areas, and one of those areas is wetlands. That's where that comes into this document. So that's why I said before it touches on some points of wetlands. It requires a collaborative regional biodiversity strategy to be developed. In our case, that would be to be updated because we have a regional biodiversity strategy. It also requires that areas used by specified highly mobile fauna be recorded. These are specified within the document, so these are animals that move around. It also requires a monitoring program, also plan, for Indigenous biodiversity to be developed. That's also a collaborative monitoring plan, and it requires that we as council, specifically us and the policy team and planning team, to update our policy statements, plans and strategies over the coming years. So this just gives us really good direction, I suppose, in that kotahi space where we were beforehand. It provides us with more general direction in the biodiversity or ecosystems and biodiversity space. Just sort of point out some key roles and responsibilities for different agencies, because it does flick through and talks to territorial authorities and regional council and local authorities. So who's who and who does what. So some key points for our territorial authorities is that the identification and mapping of SNAs is actually a role that's undertaken by them. Although within that clause there is specifics to allow for them to ask us as a regional council to assist them in doing so. And what also is the identification and acknowledgement of taonga species. That's a role that's undertaken by territorial authorities. The difference between the two is the acknowledged taonga species or ecosystems, or populations actually, they sit outside of a district plan, whereas identified taonga species, populations or ecosystems are mapped and sit within the district plan. And I guess that I put them in there because both of those come back to us as a regional council, because we have to deal with on a consent basis with adverse effects on SNAs, or later on taonga species as well. I'm not, because it's brand new, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I sort of see it in the sense of, at the moment, there is the sites of significance to Māori, maybe something like that. So if they're mapped, these taonga species, they still have to have regard to these things. Regional council, where we lead, once again, I have to point out that this is always in partnership with tangata whenua. That's quite clear from the beginning on, so early and meaningful engagement, but I suppose it still says regional council take the lead on this. We must assist, I already mentioned that, making and changing our policy statements and plans to give effect to the NPSIB, so I already mentioned that. That would be in our kotahi space. Record areas used by specified highly mobile fauna. That is a sort of recording and mapping process. We must assess Indigenous vegetation cover and set targets. Once again, this is alongside a collaborative approach alongside tangata whenua and relevant agencies such as our territorial authorities and Department of Conservation and so on. And I could have put this one in there as well, and develop a monitoring plan, the same thing. That's another collaborative approach, and prepare and update a regional biodiversity strategy. So we're the lead agency on that side. Just some timeframes. So the release was mid-2023, and in collaboration with tangata whenua and communities by mid-2031, we would have to have updated our policy statement and plans to give effect to this document. And by mid-2031 also, we would have had to develop monitoring plans. By mid-2033, the regional biodiversity strategy would have had to be updated. So it's sort of 8 years and 10-year timeframes for those things. Where I thought just some specifics around tangata whenua and community involvement is around identifying the local approach to giving effect to the decision-making principles. This is something that has to be done sort of early on. And making and changing the regional policy statement and regional plan. So once again, that's in that kotahi space, we'll be working together, direction and guidance. Recording areas of specified highly mobile fauna, and in the management of Indigenous biodiversity, such as the exercise of kaitiakitanga. And sort of within the document that how I read it is they sort of specified early and meaningful engagement and with tangata whenua in the development of everything that's specific to. So, like I said, the SNAs on Māori land, the identification of taonga species, the application of mātauranga Māori in monitoring plans. And I've already put that in there, sorry, in the development of monitoring plans for Indigenous biodiversity. So I hope I can answer any questions that you may have. That was just a quick overview. I know there's more to touch on. There's lots of other clauses I can talk to if you wish, but yeah.
Thank you, Saul. Tanya Eden.
So.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you for that update. It's an excellent update. And that was the reason I raised before with Katrina in respect of making sure that we're engaged with, because you talk about early and meaningful engagement with tangata whenua, and you talk about, a collaborative approach. So I'm aware that, and I can only speak for Mana Hurere and Te Tapino o Te Whanganui Arotu are already appointing cultural monitors out in Te Whanganui Arotu, and they're undertaking water monitoring as I speak, and also looking at the Indigenous vegetation, I guess working with Ngāti Kahungunu in respect of that. And so we just want to make sure that all these things that are talked about are actually being undertaken.
Yep.
Or planned to be undertaken. Yeah, because there's one thing talking about meaningful engagement with tangata whenua, but it's another thing actually committing to it and doing it. So just hearing you now, that's a good thing and it's a positive, but we actually want to see that undertaken. So I'll be monitoring that, and obviously talking to who I need to talk to, if it's Nick or Petey, in respect of a lot of the work that's happening at the moment, which the regional council isn't engaged with. Yeah. I know it's probably not
that's
you,
okay.
but
yeah. No, I acknowledge that, and I think it's really pertinent throughout. Like it's definitely mentioned throughout in a lot of those things. So yeah.
Yeah, and right throughout the national policy statement, I guess it says give effect to.
Yep, 3.3, which is engagement with tangata whenua. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Saul. I think we've got on screen Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair, and thanks, Saul, for that introduction. And look, I'm really happy that we've got to the point of actually having a national policy statement promulgated on Indigenous biodiversity. Great progress. I know it was a pretty long lead-in time for that. 2031 seems at the moment to be quite a long way away, and with biodiversity crisis being part of our climate crisis, I don't think we can afford to be complacent or take a lot of time. I do want to ask you, Saul, just for some thoughts and insights on the question of private lands. And we know that in the development of the NPS, Indigenous biodiversity, one of the controversies was, and possibly still remains, about private land and impositions on the farming sector. Can you give us a way to think about that, please, in the context of the lead-in time we face, freshwater farm planning, working with communities, catchment groups, and maybe opportunities to bridge some of the divides in the way that we organise ourselves in Hawke's Bay, please?
Just a small question.
Yeah. I was quite happy with the first part. Sorry, Zen. I can talk to the first part, definitely. I didn't mention the clause that relates to established activities. So there is definitely provisions within the NPSIB that do not extend. So if SNAs, which they will be, identified on private land, as well as within the conservation estate, They do not extinguish existing user rights. So existing or established activities is what they're called within the document. They are allowed to continue as long as they don't increase in intensity, scale, or character over time. So does that answer the first part of your question? The second part, I'm not sure if I can talk through farm plans.
It goes a long way. I guess the second part of my question is to flag an opportunity for this committee to think in the way that we as a group and together with staff implement this, to think about the value that we can bring through partnership and through bridging the divide, such as it may be, into that private sector. The way that, what we signal and the way that we go about it have a big impact on attitude and uptake.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ormsby.
Yeah, kia ora tēnā koe, Saul. Lovely to see you up here and great presentation. So you talked about targets in Indigenous biodiversity cover.
Yes.
So are we talking areas, certain percentages, by what time frame? So can you give any detail around that?
So yes, I can talk to that. So it's actually Indigenous vegetation cover targets.
Sorry, yeah.
And the targets are for, like I said, both urban and non-urban environments. Now, the urban environment has been defined within the MPS for urban development as urban area, and that target is a minimum of 10%. And if it's over 10%, that has to be done collaboratively with relevant stakeholders in tangata whenua to set a target that we all agree on. And in the non-urban environment, it is exactly the same, though the non-urban environment, personally, it's harder because it just says non-urban environment. What does that mean? I'm not sure at this moment. It's still relatively new, this document. So is it going to be broken down into ecological districts, or is it just region-wide, everything else apart from urban areas? I'm not sure. But once again, those targets have to be set collaboratively as well. Yeah.
So through the Kotahi plan, ideally, or another process you're talking about?
So through the RPS part of the plan, the direction will be given, but those targets will be set aside from that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Okay. To our CEO.
Just a suggestion to the committee that there might be a piece of work that we could usually do as officers and come back to you with. There's so many moving parts at the moment around NPSs, NESs, RMA reform. I'm looking to give Katrina's team, with some input from Pierre, a bit of a difficult job, but I kind of want a picture of all of these moving parts with some timelines in it. Mm-hmm. That kind of goes to get from point A to the end of the NPS for freshwater. It takes us 10 years, and there's some critical milestones in it. The same for the other kind of NPSs that are ahead of us, and then maybe we could spend some time in a workshop before a committee meeting working our way through that, and also working out how adequately are we collectively resourced to do those critical major steps. And that might be a really useful thing for this committee as the regional council heads into its LTP, but also gives us the opportunity to go, we think we can, we think we can't, or where are we stuck? So if we keep bringing that kind of map back to future committee meetings, if we're stuck on whatever it might be, FMUs or SNAs, or we know that, and we're not, if you're like me, relatively new to the region, trying to work out where are we at in all these processes. That's my suggestion, that we have a crack at that and then spend some time looking at it.
I think that's a good suggestion. I'm also thinking from the point of view of tangata whenua engagement, something that Tanya Eden was emphasising, knowing what information we are likely to be called on to provide by what time, with plenty of lead-in notice and discussions about resourcing, will be important to whether we're successful in being able to provide what's needed.
So through you, Chair, as well, what I didn't mention is that there is an implementation plan that came with this document, and within the implementation plan, they did talk about a implementation plan for Māori that should be released later on this year, and that may talk to some resourcing as well and some timeframes there. And also, to go back to your question, Hiniwai, sorry, what I didn't mention within those Indigenous vegetation targets is there is areas that are prioritised for restoration. So it's not just about planting everywhere. There is actually specific areas that have to be taken into regard. So degraded SNAs also. It's about protecting core ecological remnants rather than trying to recreate something.
And through the chair, just back to Saul, but particularly what Nick talked about, it would be great to have that continuum, that we can actually see those key milestones there and what input we as tangata whenua can have in those, because we've sort of looked at the same sort of process on a smaller scale, granted, for Te Muruwai o Te Whanga, our committee on that, and making sure we've got a continuum. We can see all the key levers that are at play, the key legislative requirements coming in, because, I mean, all of us don't have the resources to, be in these spaces every day of the week and have very limited staffing. So I guess for us, it's important as tangata whenua groups, PSGs, whoever, to see that on that continuum and what's coming into effect right throughout, if that's possible, please.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think so. And sometimes it helps identify where we've got to collaborate because we haven't got the resource.
Yeah.
So,
And we both go,
yeah.
yeah. Ka pai, Laura.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Saul. Thank you. This is just a scenario I want to present to you. Various Māori land blocks have various SNAs in them. However, they're always plagued with either gorse or wildling, which impacts on the biodiversity, but we've got a CNN. In that case, in restoration, because these are large blocks, if you just drive anywhere, you'll see these gorse and that's Māori land. So therefore, how do we sit in this NPS if we've got wildling from the forestry scattered on our whenua, as well as have the freshwater outlets?
So I just flicked over to the restoration clause to have a look there, and it does say, but it's maybe a little bit different, but it does talk to areas of Indigenous biodiversity on specified Māori land where restoration is advanced by the Māori landowners. So that is a priority area, but that sort of seems to talk to when restoration has already been undertaken.
Right.
What you're talking to, I don't know if I can talk about that here, I suppose, but I guess that's maybe a side topic to do with the biodiversity credits and what's going on as a sort of side project.
Just in addition to that, how can we placate our shareholders if we do have an SNA there with fear of public works? Would this answer that? This policy?
Sorry, through you, Chair, you say fear of public works? What do you mean?
So if you are in a very remote community and you have the fresh water coming through a Baiara spring that comes out into your whenua, and you haven't actually told anyone about it, but you want to restore the area, and then you disclose that you have this freshwater spring, how can we be assured as shareholders that that's not going to be acquired for the public good
You mean through an SNA?
through the SNA?
So SNA have qualifying criteria, and like a spring, there's certain criteria like rarity, distinctiveness, and they have to meet an ecological context.
Sorry, through you, Chair. There is no provisions to acquire land.
Okay.
I hear what you're saying though, and from my experience many years ago in Taranaki, which was one of the last regions to have formal SNA rules in there. Beautiful tracts of bush, landowners had protected them and felt that they were being felt that it was almost a negative for them because they had gone to some extent of protecting this bush without any rules, to then have rules put over top of them that they then couldn't do anything with. So there was a little bit of a negative reaction to it in terms of, well, now I'm going to cut down my bush. But people don't, because they retain it, because they love it, because it gives them value more than what a rule says that it should have as a value. But what we did do, and we did really successfully, was work with QE2.
Yes.
And we got huge amounts of free fencing, huge amounts of pest control, and also some development rights, particularly for Māori land who, have large tracts of land covered in native bush, and wrote in. So, having said that, lots of iwi, of course, don't want QE2 on their land either. And so you can go through the Whenua Māori tract as well, but allowing, and I think this is what the NPSIB is recognising, is that protect the land and allow limited development. So I think this will work, but as we work through the NPSIB and figure it out, because we're still new to this ourselves, we'll have individual conversations with you so that you can understand where you are in all of that.
Okay, thank you. I had a short, last, very technical question for you. You ready? What is highly mobile fauna?
Yeah.
So
Is that another word for birds?
So
What are they talking about?
One the bird of the year, but wasn't a bird. So specified highly mobile fauna. So they are specified within an appendix within the document, and they are mobile fauna. They move a lot. So migratory species, or pika bats, kaka, godwits, raibil, they move. So they use different environments, and they must be, so any environment that's used for part of their life cycle must be recorded, and there'll be management within these clauses of management regimes that are put in to sort of, I shouldn't say protect, that's quite a strong word, but to address these areas that they use.
Right, thank you. Thanks for that.
Kia ora.
I just thought I'd make a point through you, Chair, and that is when we use terms like NPSIB and others, sometimes what we don't see is perhaps the whakapapa that sits in behind that. And this is a good time to actually acknowledge Y262.
Yes.
Which was filed by 6 claimants back in 1991, and the subsequent tribunal hearing that was overseen by Justice Joe Williams, and the panel that contributed to that, which also had Dr. Roger Marker on there on behalf of us. So it's good sometimes to look back. I know we're looking forward, but it's good to look back and understand that there is a whakapapa in a sense that sits in behind what we're talking about today in terms of flora and fauna, and a great advocate for that was Moana Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that whakapapa. That's good to know. I didn't know
Put
that.
on wine bottles.
So any last questions for Saul before we let him go? Saul, thank you for your presentation today and being grilled. Some good questions. And can I have someone please move that we accept that update or that report? Thank you, Teresa. And seconder, Laura. Thank you. Kia mihi.
Right. So mine isn't nearly as long or have as many cute pictures in it. But I am covering off the national policy statement for greenhouse gas from process heat. That one doesn't condense quite as easily into a name, but it came into force in July 2023, and the basic aim of it is to reduce emissions from greenhouse gases through managing the discharge to air from the production of heat for industrial purposes. So there's also a NES which supports this, and that has some limits in it, and this particular MPS and NES applies to the emissions from fossil fuel heats, sources such as boilers, furnaces, engines, other combustion that uses coal, coke, diesel, LPG, natural gas, oil, peat, plastics and used oils, so all of those kind of things. And in the MPS there are some requirements. It prohibits discharges of greenhouse gases from new industrial heat from devices that burn coal below 300 degrees C, and phases out any existing heat devices that burn coal by 2020 2037, sorry. So that's probably the real headliner, that by 2037 there's no coal burning. I had a brief look into our consents this morning, and as I understand it, we have got 2 consents currently for discharges to air from coal, but those also have the ability to burn wood, pellets and biomass. So although they hold a consent for coal burning, they may not be using that. Greenhouse gas emissions are reduced over time from heat devices through a resource consent process and developing and implementing emissions plans. So these emissions plans where the consent holders show that they are adopting the best practical option to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So there really is an onus on them to show that they have considered everything that is financially viable and that it is kind of the best outcome as well. And after there was a change to the RMA last November, decision makers, which is us with our consents team, must recognise and consider the cumulative effects of these greenhouse gas emissions when assessing the resource consent. So rather than just thinking about the discharge on a one-by-one basis, we have to look at what has been admitted into the region as a whole. And there's some more guidelines around a more nationally consistent resource consenting conditions, and that includes the monitoring and reporting aspects of those consents as well. So those emission plans that I mentioned before, every consent application has to come with an emission plan, and they have to include a transition pathway of how they're going to reduce emissions and the timeframes of those. An assessment of any efficiency improvement that could be made. So how could they be doing what they're doing currently better? And if they're looking at new devices, that they've had an assessment of any alternatives that could be used in place. And then an assessment of the best practicable option to prevent or minimise any actual or likely adverse effects on climate change. And then this is my last slide. So this is just a timing slide. It shows that it commenced in July. We've got those prohibited activities on new coal devices coming in immediately, and a restricted discretionary activity for new fossil fuel devices coming in immediately as well. So those rules will be slotted into our regional plan through section 55, which means that they're just included. And then we've got some later dates there for consents that are about to expire and non-statutory guidance. So that's my story. Any questions?
Thank you, Nicola. Did you have a question? No? Does someone have a question for Nicola?
Come on, anyone? Someone?
Oh, Councillor.
Yes, I do.
Councillor Harding, thank you.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and through you, thank you, Nicola, for that. Look, it's great that when we get these crises, because it's so much quicker than having to
specifically, it's more in regards to kind of a process heat, which,
understood.
yeah, I don't think it does capture, but I'll keep an eye on that and see if there's any more information or guidance comes out.
Yeah, just the fourth bullet point down there in your table kind of would, when you're taken on its face, would include them.
Yep, no, I'm happy to look into that one.
Thank you.
I had a question. So given these new requirements in our region, who would be the main contenders here that would be affected by this?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So when you look at process heat, that sits under what's called, so when we did our regional climate footprint, so this is what sits under our stationary energy use, which was up by 20%, but coal was down by 18% in that. So when we're looking at the two coal consents, Pukeura Estate, which I don't know whether they would be using that currently, because I understand it's for sale. And then it was the timber processing in Wairoa, but once again, that also had a consent the consent was also for wood pellets, so they may not be using it. When you go through the next kind of big players in terms of gas, you're looking at industry, hospital, that type of thing. So, yeah, those are probably it's your bigger scale industry that you'd be looking at capturing in that.
And very costly to transfer to a new something.
I don't know. I don't know
Well,
about
there's a lead-in, I mean,
and there is a lead-in, and there is also an exemption around, there's acknowledgement of when those fuels are used for emergency purposes, like a boiler or something in a hospital or a generator. So,
Yes.
yeah.
The other question I had for you was, this is maybe a really unfair question, but was it reasonably practicable?
Yeah.
Does that mean if it costs me too much, so it eats into my profit, it's not reasonably practicable? It might be a question for Martin, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a factor in what's reasonably practicable, but it's not the overriding one. There's available technologies, there is the financial impact. I imagine there's the benefits of the activity and what it's actually doing. I might factor into that as well. So it's not, it's not a complete shutout because it's expensive. That'd be my thinking.
Thank you for that. Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Just just to follow on from the coal consent, so the mill you're talking about, they sawdust.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
they don't use
yeah,
coal.
so that was what I was saying. Although they hold that consent to be able to burn coal, they may not choose to use that.
Yeah, we did a cultural impact assessment on. The other one is AFCO. It's just funny, I thought you were going to mention AFCO.
Oh, I'm not sure about that one.
Because they've just transitioned into, I think, pellets.
Yeah.
They're not using coal anymore, so we go to the annual reports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, there is a
Being
general.
phased out, which
Yeah.
is good thing.
Yeah, there is a general movement away from coal, and that they know that it's not going to be sustainable long term or at all. So, yeah.
So you had a lot of questions.
Okay.
Lovely, you did well with that topic, thank you.
Tried to make it as
10, 9 out of 10.
Yeah, good, sharp, short, punchy. We moved previous one, can I have someone to move that we accept Nicola's update, please? Michelle, thank you. Seconder, thank you. Councillor Ormsby. Whakai Tātou?
Aye. Can I just ask, sorry, through the chair, just one thing? There's a number of reports you refer to in here.
Yeah.
And I noticed the water services entities reforms are in here as well. And also the ETS. Yeah, so is it possible to get a written update on those, or is this your updates?
The written
in here?
updates in there. If you'd
Yeah,
like
is there-
anything verbal, if there's anything you'd like
I
us
can
to answer, we can.
Request?
Yeah. Or if there's anything now that you'd like to.
Yeah,
Ask,
just
yeah.
to get an update on
I don't know if I can speak to the water
okay.
services. I don't know. Gav's probably.
Yeah, if people can't speak to it, then I'm not going to waste anyone's time, but yeah.
Dr. Pete's happy to.
Dr. Pete?
I can try on water services. I think the NTF discussions are ongoing. As a regional council, we've stayed quite out of them because they're not really. The only point at which they become of really interest to the regional council is when it comes to the strategy around consenting and compliance. I understand there's some potential differences in timing between Tairāwhiti and the Hawke's Bay councils, and they're working through what that might look like for
Meetings next week.
Yeah, that's as much as I know, too, which is probably the same as you.
I know, but more is just testing you, no. No, I know there's meetings next week because Hirota and Takitimu have formed the entity.
Yeah.
All of our PSGE groups and iwi groups and that. So we meet next week with all the mayors of the councils. Yeah, so I'm just, and I was questioning to ask what's HBRC's role in any of this, considering the water, obviously,
Yeah.
services entity will have a bit of an impact.
Yeah, it comes essentially as the regulator of whatever that entity's activities look like. And I think we will be particularly interested in things like long-standing wastewater treatment plants that have been non-compliant or are running on existing use rights, and wanting to work with the entity on prioritising getting those fixed. Because I guess the part of the reason for the entity is it's got the ability to borrow money and get on with some things. And if I looked at somewhere like Central Hawke's Bay, there's a deficit in terms of where they're at with compliance, and that needs fixing for the benefit of the why ultimately.
Thank you.
The ETS?
Yeah,
Was it
ETS,
ETS? Yeah. Saul was involved with the submission. So if there's any questions, yeah.
So what was the specific question around the ETS?
I was just asking for an update, but yeah, you said that it's in here.
So we
Which I
were,
did read.
I have been
but we might
involved
have
in,
something else. Yeah.
well, I was involved in a submission, a joint submission actually. Well, it was a dual submission. There was 2 documents around the ETS review. One was around the redesigning of the permanent forestry category, and the other one was, what was it around? The direction of the ETS to do with prioritising reductions over removals and so on and so forth. And so I did it in conjunction with a colleague and the policy team, and also across council. And council's view was, we looked at from Outrage to Optimism report and took some of those into account, and also our Land for Life priorities, and we went for sort of a balanced approach, we thought, in the redesigning of the permanent forestry category, and then just canvass views across council for the ETS for where we should be prioritising reductions over removals. Yeah, I can't really speak to more than that.
No, that's right. And just through the chair, if there is sort of any documentation that can update us that can be attached to these, that would be good. Yeah.
Maybe a link.
Yes, I think the links
There's
only
a couple
are
links.
on
or
there.
something.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
links on
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tapai.
you.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, I think that concludes that section. Thank you, team. And then we're on to
Oh,
discuss.
hang on, Chair,
Oh, beg your pardon.
Zan, Martin's got his hand up, and I have too.
Oh, okay,
I don't know
beg
if
your pardon.
Martin's- I've got a question on ETS, but let's go with Martin first.
All right, we'll go to Martin Williams first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Zan. It was just apropos of what Saul's just addressed. I'd be very keen to see a copy of the staff submission on the ETS review for the permanent forest sink category. I actually did something myself that I've seldom, if ever, done, and made my own submission on that last Friday to support greater incentives for Indigenous options within the permanent forest category so that they could compete with Pinus radiata, at least in the initial stages of forest establishment. And so, yeah, I'm keen to see where the staff got to on that. And the next thing is just to commend, please, or request, or whatever the correct term is, to the staff that they do give active consideration to supporting or submitting in support of a biodiversity credit system in the discussion document that closes in November. For the same reasons, this is going to be absolutely critical to our Land for Life program, and would equally, I think, be part of a biodiversity strategy of the kind required by Appendix 5 to the NPSIB that Saul was just talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, and I just wonder, following up on that then, I'm assuming that most people here in the RPC committee would be supportive of a submission along those lines. It'd be good to see that, and also to make, perhaps circulate the submission that was made, that Martin's referred to, so we can all see it.
So
Thank you.
we can see.
Lovely, and then back to you, councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Look, my question is probably more for the Rupu rather than Saul, but it's in relation to ETS and the permanent forest category. I'm just aware that some tangata whenua groups have issues with the potential for constraints to be put on permanent forest categories, particularly for for non-Indigenous because of a loss of potential development rights and loss of income and and loss of value in treaty settlements. It would just be helpful, I think, certainly for me and maybe for other of my councillors, to know where those concerns might lie, because I think they will be better informed. So if some groups have made submissions or do have issues, and we can get visibility into those, that would benefit us, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if the staff are aware of some of the key submitters that might have been made, because I know there were some Māori groups who were very actively opposed to. Are we talking about taking plantation forestry out of the ETS? Is that what we're talking about?
There was two.
Yes.
Yeah, redesigning the permanent forestry category. Yep.
Well, maybe if you wouldn't mind checking, because I know there were, I can't remember the name of the groups that were involved, but there were ones that have actually, I think, instigated potentially court action in relation to that. I can speak from my little bit of knowledge. A lot of treaty settlement groups had very few Crown assets that were available to them to be part of their treaty settlement. But one of the assets that the Crown had, which is a result of litigation from decades ago, was Crown forestry rentals. And so for a lot of treaty groups, in fact, I would say all our treaty groups have as a significant part of the original settlement Crown licensed land. And there were multiple benefits from it. One was that it was land. Two was that it had a source of income. It already had trees on it from which settlement groups could derive some of the accumulated rentals. So economically, there was an incentive to include those blocks in our settlements. But I can't actually speak to the negative impacts in any detail of taking out those forests from the ETS, but that would then potentially lessen the value of those settlement assets to those entities, and that's a problem because part of getting them was the whole package. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with those arguments, but you might be able to articulate them better than me.
In that review document or that submission. I'm still relatively new to that topic, but I think, however, we took quite a balanced approach where we did acknowledge that throughout. So there was specific questions that related to forestry on Māori land and the impacts on Māori in redesigning the permanent forestry category. So, like I said, we'll be able to circulate that document or that submission, but I think that we took a relatively balanced approach rather than going in one direction saying only Indigenous forestry, no such thing as permanent, or only permanent, and only exotic and no Indigenous.
And through the chair, Tanya is exactly right, Zan, and we're doing some work with iwi chairs at the moment, so I'll get some information for you around that, particularly around the loss of potential development rights going to the future on ETS. So, yeah, I can pull something together too. So, kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. Hey, look, and just because Martin's prompted me, if you are able to give us some insight into how some of the concerns might be allayed with a biodiversity credit system or some other system, as opposed to just a treaty solution, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Not my idea, Martin, and a good one.
Okay. All right. Any other comments before we close that off? I think I should up and leave while you wait. Ka pai. All right. So that brings us to the last item with 5 to 10 minutes to go. Discussion of minor items. We've dealt with several of them. Alison, can you tell us what the other couple were, I think?
So we dealt with the master plan change and the FNU. There was the debris at the, and I didn't quite get the name.
In Wairoa.
In Wairoa.
Ka pai. Is anyone able to speak to that item around the question Michelle raised about debris?
I think we might take that as a follow-up.
A follow-up
If
item?
Michelle would like to just tell us what the issue is, we can follow up.
So, there's the funding for clearance of debris
Yes.
and slash.
The Māori fund?
Where did that come from? I'm not quite sure who Okay, did they have to get a consent to do that because they're messing with the coastline? It's just that at the Mātangiro Reserves Board was not approached on that matter, and myself and Katarina, who's the Kawana, who's the chair of Mātangiro, and I'm a trustee as well representing Tātou Tātou. We went down to have a look, and we did request that the native would be retrieved for marae, which is ka pai, that's been done, but when we went and had a look at the beach, the sand dunes there, they're actually absolutely wiped out of any driftwood. And so, not a scientist on this thing, but when I've gone up to the beach, you can see all the insects and everything around the driftwood. And I feel that they must have a purpose as well in nature, that they help hold up those dunes, because if we haven't got them, our town is open to the sea. The other thing is, at this moment, and there may be an expert sitting in here, but I know that we have banned Dodorol in the Whakamahi area and right up, because this debris clearance is going right up to Mahia. We have the Dodorol there. I photographed it last year, and that's the area where they nest. And they use some of the smaller debris to help, sort of camouflage their nest. They nest in the sand, and I'm a bit concerned about how that's impacting that, because that's an endangered species. So one, it didn't come to our tepu because that's legislated. And, just listening to the Indigenous biodiversity, false statement. So, there's concern there that there should have been an approach to the Mātangiro, because they're going into another part of our reserves area in the mouth. There is a lot of debris there as well, but we're just got to be mindful not to take everything.
Perhaps through you, Chair, just one of the first questions was who's administering the fund in relation to that. So it was 16.7 and 13.3 that was split between us with the greater amount here in Hawke's Bay and with Tairāwhiti. And it was being administered through Te Puni Kōkiri. That's who was administering that in terms of debris sediment removal from whenua Māori.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's still open, that fund, because I just asked about it this morning.
I'm not got anything against the fund, it's just that
The way it's
didn't
done.
they need to have some sort of consent or permission? They definitely needed our permission to the Reserves Act,
Well,
and it wasn't.
Chair, we'll follow up on that
Yeah.
and come back to you, Michelle. Kei te pai?
Yeah, it's like it's unconsented. I wouldn't be allowed to go and do stuff like that, so why should anybody else? They still need to, go through a process. So there's a lot of concern from tangata whenua and the general community back home as to what's happening. Kia ora.
All right, so that you're going to follow up with that?
Yeah, I'll follow up with our consents team.
Okay, lovely. All right, was there another one?
Yes, just the standing update for the recovery in specifically on name categorisation in whenua Māori that Tanya raised.
That was mine. Yeah,
Sorry, can
and
you
the
just
reason it's just an standing update now on recovery,
yes.
because some of us have been excluded from being on the recovery committee. So I think on principle, it's really important that we are updated, through this forum. I don't know if my peers agree with that, but it's something.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
We haven't formally agreed, through you, Madam Chair, we haven't formally agreed to the seats that we're going to be taking in the pre-huri.
Right.
So, and you're correct, because we're part of it, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do wonder then, perhaps the most efficient way to do that, rather than half of this committee is already sitting on that committee, whether there's just an update given directly to the tangata whenua members at our hui. Would that suffice?
No, I'd like one in this RPC,
RPC?
yeah.
Because
because I think it's only right that all of our members be updated. That wasn't our call to be excluded from that. In fact, RPC members, our tangata whenua members wanted to be a part of that, so that would have probably saved having to be repetitive in nature, but it is what it is, and now we'd like a full update, and I'm speaking on behalf of Mana Auriri, but I'm thinking others are in agreement with me.
Yeah, I definitely am.
We all would. Thank you.
Yeah, so can I suggest there's, with the recovery committee, there is an updated section. If you'd like that to be also included in
The pack?
the pack?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
That's
then any
very good.
questions on that could be brought. Okay.
I'll ask colleagues what they think, yeah.
Just a comment on that. Yeah, I'd like a more brief, because we get the weekly ones via the email, which is about a 7 to 8 minute read, and it's not linking to anything, so something clear. I mean, we get a regular update on the recovery, but it's not readable, not for me anyway, and I'm a reader. But just going on that, if a compilation can be done, because it's very specific in the weekly, but yeah, it's just unreadable.
Unreadable because, just so we can help our staff understand what's not working?
So this one's about the salt recovery, the last one, task force, and it's the newsletter, but it's links to about 50 links within the link so you have to keep reading that to get that clearer picture. So this one is from the waste team, waste at HBRC.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you're saying is,
Simple.
you actually want the headlines
Yeah.
so that you don't have to search for what the message is.
Yes, please.
Is that the,
Yeah, because otherwise it's just another email that we get that we just,
can't get the
get
information
them,
quickly
yeah.
enough? Okay,
Please.
well, that's good feedback.
so,
And
I
through
hope
the
it's
chair,
good
I don't get those,
Oh.
but yeah, so
Okay.
I don't get any updates, but I think from my perspective, it's just in respect of the Hawke's Bay Recovery Plan.
It gets you to
I
your
know there's a
operations
lot
team.
that Hawke's Bay Regional Council are involved with. We're not getting oversight as an RPC on that information. I sit on the oversight board and get a lot of information, but I'm aware that my colleagues don't get it. So
Yeah.
I think RPC, that's one of the essence of why we're here,
Yeah.
and particularly around recovery, is that we need to be fully informed, yeah.
Yeah, ka pai.
And I guess it would have been okay if had we been sitting and not blocked from sitting on that group, we would have got that information, but now we're asking for this information to come before us. Yeah.
Okay, well, the suggestion Councillor Ormsby's given is to have the HBRC recovery update, which is a summary provided at that meeting, to append it to our
yes, please.
packs. The only thing I'm thinking of is that the Cyclone Recovery Committee meets every 6 weeks.
6, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the RPC is meeting as regularly, but let's see how it goes and see if it actually provides enough information at the next hui we have, and then we can see whether this is actually what we're looking for.
Because I know there's critical work going on out there by HBRC and also others, but I mean, I think it's really, really important because you are, and we are the spokespeople and representatives and mandated to be here, and that we can share that information back to our people.
Okay.
And I guess we know how important that is, yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, let's make a note of adding that to our next RPC pack.
And I've also got a question, like, on behalf of, so this is what happens when you're excluded. We don't know if when are we going to move to 2C, because we're still in 2A, and I don't get any updates. Well, I'm not quite sure the updates that Tony are getting, but that's where the exclusion of impacted area, it's vital that we know what's going on.
Able to speak to that? I'll ask Nick to
I
speak
think
to that.
in the case of Wairoa, we've established that tripartite governance hui. So that'll be the place, I think, for us to be able to have that discussion, essentially for Wairoa, that anywhere where we've got to build new infrastructure, there's 3 tests we have to meet to go from 2A to 2C. And those three tests are, there has to be a designed concept, so what could be built if something needs to be built? Have we got the putia to do it? And is there an interest in the land? And that doesn't mean ownership of the land, but it means that the assets can be maintained over time. If those three things are satisfied, an area that's 2A can go to 2C and then through to 1. So in Wairoa, the putia is there in the government announcement, but the process at the moment is around what's the potential design look like, and the third leg of that then will be if there's a design that the community's supportive of, the next step is the interest in the whenua.
Supplementary. So we're involved, and I know there's like a meeting tonight because we had a meeting at Hiramihi on Saturday.
Yeah.
And we had members of the public come in and participate. But that process isn't going to be, it's not going to turn around in a couple of weeks, a month. It's going to take a long time. And the minister said to us, he promised that we'd have an answer by the end of the July. We had an answer that, yeah, you got 70 million, and we asked for a bespoke plan for Wairoa because we had no flood protection. But yet again, we're disadvantaged because we're going to go through all this process. You know what I mean? So it's not just 2A, it's a process. Our people are still living in, unhealthy homes right now because they've got nowhere else to live. You're keeping us in limbo. And you can blame the government, but in the end, it's a motion from the regional council that moves us to 2C. You're nearly there. It's unfair. It's unfair. And our people, I'm living it myself, and so are there 303 affected homes, over 600 properties, and we're still in 2A. The rest of Hawke's Bay is C, or P, or 3, unfortunately for some 3. At least you know your fate. At least you can move on. But in 2A, we can't. And we have engaged, used our tripartite mechanism in Tātou to get you to the table to make that happen. A lot of promises, but this process is going to take a long time. It's unfair to our people.
And look, we want to get there as fast as we possibly can. There are other 2As across Hawke's Bay as well, having to go through the same thing. We just need that concept sorted out, because if we haven't got a design, I would end up moving people to 2C, and then they, if we can't build anything, then they end up in 3. So it's giving them the opportunity to for that to happen.
Participate,
It's got to happen as fast as we can.
I understand that, Nick, but when we had the hui, it was, okay, there's the 1994 post-cyclone Bola, report, and the recommendations that came out of that. It was my understanding when we had our tripartite agreement, tripartite hui, that was enough to move us to 2C, but obviously it wasn't. You need to tell us the truth. If it's going to take a long time, you need to tell the people, because they're sitting there with no hot water, no electricity,
No, I appreciate that.
no walls, that sort of thing. So it's easy to make decisions when you're not living it.
Tapai, so I think we've all heard Michelle's concerns there. I understand but don't know much about the tripartite agreement, but I'm assuming that it requires regular meetings, and hopefully, I hope that this will be something that can be resolved at those meetings, and that Michelle doesn't have to bring it up at this hui again. Thank you, Michelle.
Progress.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so that brings us to an end, if that's all the minor items.
And so, sorry, through the chair, what have we resolved around the recovery?
That we will append the recovery update, and this one's about 7 pages long, to our next board pack, so that we can see what that is, and we'll have staff available to answer questions if there are questions coming out of that.
And that covers the recovery?
That covers all aspects of the recovery program that the HBRC is involved in.
All of that,
I thought.
Gee, and 7 pages, that's pretty good.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I suppose also note that our resolution was opposed through the regional council. It was opposed unanimously by the councillors.
Oh, this is for...
The 4 seats.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's for the
Madam Chair.
Cyclone Recovery Committee. Yeah, understood. Yeah, I think that's noted and point made. All right, well, if that's everything for today, I don't need to move the minor items, do I? No? Cool, all right. Well, thank you for bearing with me this afternoon, long day, for those of you who were here for the earlier committee meeting. Thank you to the staff, managers and staff for all the effort they put into our hui today. Not the most exciting kaupapa, but lots of interesting things we needed to talk about. So thank you to the staff, thank you. I wonder if I can call on Matua Karona to close our hui for us this afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Matua tamo were tapu ane pono. Whakapai ngā haere o mātou o tēnei hui. O mai te pika ora me te whānamatanga. Manga ana hui tautoko ai ni a ākene ai.
Aye. That's right.